Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 25th episode of the Unbox, where I answer your questions. And this time we're jumping back into Dragon Templar's question, who wants to know, Youngblood, how much do you think the Super Dreadnought for the UEE will cost if we'll actually get a civilian variant that players can buy? The Super Dreadnought is basically going to be a ship that I think is going to show up in the game as kind of like an in-game weapon for the UEE. My guess is it's so large, it is probably going to be built into the storyline. It's probably going to be one Super Dreadnought in the entire UEE fleet, let alone for civilians. So as far as what the cost is going to be, I can't even throw a number out because I think it's going to be absurdly expensive. You know, when we read the lore about Project Uadine, they were already talking about how they were shuffling money towards that project, and it was an extremely expensive undertaking. So I don't think that we're ever going to see what the actual cost was on that, unless maybe there's a mission to kind of steal information and then we get more backstory on it. But there is no way that ship is going to be available for players. I would venture a guess that it's going to be super protected, and even if we could have a massive player organized fleet, the instant system is probably going to prevent us from doing any large scale combat against it to a point to where you could actually capture the ship. So I don't think we're ever going to see a civilian variant of it, and I don't have any idea of what the cost would be. But you can probably say, whatever the cost of a Bengal is, you can probably multiply it by 10 or 15 and end up getting the cost of the Super Dreadnought. Josh VS Gaming says, I want to haul cargo and do combat. I know the Cutlass is that, but it's so damn glitchy. What should I do? So the Cutlass is in a really weird place right now because it's in the midst of a rework. And right now I don't think they're actually, I don't know what they're doing to it as far as actual redesign, but they're kind of going through and working with the community to figure out what the community wants the ship to be, because it's kind of been in a bad place. The combat piece of the Cutlass is going to be toned down to a certain extent because that's why we peeled off and ended up getting the Buccaneer. That being said, it's still going to have a lot of hard points. It's still going to be a kind of a brawler in a way. It's just not going to be the nimble fighter we thought it was going to be. The Cutlass is still going to be a really well-rounded ship. It should have a lot of decent cargo. It's got a lot of modularity going for it. And I think we're going to see improvements to the flight model. But what that ends up being in the end, we're not sure. So as far as cargo and combat, I think the Cutlass is still going to be a pretty good option for you because there's not a lot of combat ships that are really cargo capable. Now, if we end up getting some modularity on a ship like the Redeemer, you may end up having a little bit of cargo, but it's always going to favor combat. So I think for you, that Cutlass still makes sense. I would just sit on it and wait and see what happens. I think I saw in the comments that your budget's about 125. If it was more, I would say to start looking towards the, maybe like the Constellation Andromeda, but that's still going to come with a higher crew, requirement. So for now, my best bet for you would be just to wait on that Cutlass and see what direction it goes, because that's going to kind of determine how that ends up looking in the end and whether it can actually fit that role that you want. Vanilla Doe says, what ships like Carrack, Caterpillar, etc., and when do you think they're getting hangar ready? I'm really hyped up about the Carrack, but do you think it'll be ready for summer? So the Caterpillar is the one that's getting love right now and is actually being worked. We're starting to get new, concept art of it. We're seeing it gray boxed and all that kind of thing. So we're getting more information about the Caterpillar, and it's one that is getting the current focus right now. So I think the Cat has a much higher likelihood of getting released before the Carrack, especially since the Cat's been around for longer than the Carrack as far as the concept is concerned. I think the Carrack is going to be getting attention relatively soon. I think it is being worked on now, and we'll probably start seeing information about it and pictures and updates released on it, because I would imagine that being a military pathfinder, or at least to some extent, is probably going to play some role in Squadron 42, and that seems to be what really drives what's getting the priority. Now, I don't think it's going to be ready before summer, considering we're in June now, but I think we're going to start seeing more information about it coming out pretty soon. Hershey Lollipop says, I want to be a contract killer. Will that be possible, or will that be a possible job, and is there a way to kill without getting a bounty? So the bounty system is all going to be about monitored space. So if you are in a monitored area, so a UEE system that has like the probes out there, or has the comm arrays, and you kill somebody, it doesn't matter if if anybody sees you, that station is seeing you and it's been monitored, so you would end up with a bounty. Now, if you're a far enough distance away and you're in non-monitored space, then basically it's kind of free reign. But there's a possibility that if somebody is in that system and happens to see you kill somebody even outside of monitored space, they could then relay that information and you end up with a bounty. We're going to need to see how it develops as we get more systems and what UEE control actually means. And you say here, and will I end up going to jail even though it's my job to be a contract killer? Yeah, if you kill somebody in monitored space and you end up with a bounty, you could very well end up in jail. It's not that different from being here on Earth. Killing somebody is considered illegal. So it doesn't matter if your job is a contract killer for the mob. You're the one who chose to be a contract killer for the mob. You're still voluntarily breaking the law. So the fact that it's your job doesn't dictate whether you end up in prison or not. It's whether you're following the letter of the law. Another question you have in here is also, you want to own an F8 Lightning, but I don't want a bad rap sheet. Is there a way to do that? Nope. It's a military fighter. If you try and get one, it's going to be pretty much specifically from, stealing it from the military or potentially killing a pilot and repairing it. So there's not a good way to do that. Now, if you find some F8 Lightning that ends up being a derelict floating around, you may be able to repair that and claim it under like free use or whatever, but you're not going to be able to just steal one from the UEE, and they're probably not selling their top-of-the-line fighter to civilians. So there's probably not going to be a good way to do that. And your last question is, what are some good assassination ships? Really anything that's highly combat-focused with a lot of firepower, but you also need to make sure that people aren't going to run. So you kind of need that balance of maybe like speed and firepower. So something like a Saber, especially with the stealth, could be a good assassination ship because you could potentially hide and then jump into combat and do a lot of damage. The new Buccaneer has a lot of firepower on it, so that could potentially be a good option for you as well. Or you could just go full-on firepower and say, something like a Redeemer, a gunboat, or maybe a Retaliator with the torpedoes. Like, those are types of like Alpha Strike types of ships that I think could do a really good job of killing somebody before they even know it happened. Din949 says, hey STL, what advantages do you think the new Corvette will have over other capital ships and other ships in its size range, like the Carrack and Constellations? So, the Corvette, the Polaris, it's like the smallest capital ship possible, and I don't even put it in the capital ship category. It's a military ship. It's big, but it doesn't really hold a candle compared to something like a Javelin. So I think when we start talking about what the difference is going to be between a Carrack and a Constellation, the Constellation is a well-rounded ship, even most of the variants. But I think what we want to say is, all right, let's compare it to like the Andromeda. The Andromeda is an all-around versatile craft that is very combat capable. The Carrack is an exploration ship that has some versatility in things like cargo, has some decent armament on it, and it should be fairly well armored. The Polaris is going to be combat focused. It's a military craft, so I think it's probably going to have more guns on it. It's probably going to carry less cargo. I think what you're going to see out of the Corvette is a decently fast, large-scale ship that's capable of doing a lot of damage. Now, it's not going to be that, going back to Alpha Strike, it's not going to have the centerline railgun that you've got on something like an Idris. But it's probably going to have a lot of turrets on it, or it's going to have some relatively large, maybe like size 5 or size 6 type weapons on it. It's not capital class weaponry, but it's probably going to be large weapons that are capable of doing sustained damage while you're able to kind of outmaneuver some of the larger ships. So I really envision the Polaris as being almost like an escort craft for larger military vessels as compared to being that full-on first strike type of ship. Classified Prodigy says, hey Youngblood, do you think that the punishment for pirates will be too steep, meaning that it's not worth killing somebody because the bounty's kind of like the Dark Zone in the Division? I haven't played the Division, but there's going to be steep penalties for pirates. If you steal, you're going to get a bounty. If you kill somebody, you're going to get a bounty. Like, those types of things are going to happen. But the difference is, pirates don't care, or some of them won't. For some, having that reputation is almost like a badge of honor. For others, they're going to find ways to reduce their bounty to make sure they're flying under the radar. And for others, it may not be worth getting that punishment, so they may only do piracy in areas where they know they can get away with it. So going back to what we talked about with monitored space, if you're not if you're conducting your piracy in non-monitored space, there's a less likelihood that you're going to end up with a bounty. So some pirates are just going to play it safe and stay in, kind of like dark areas that aren't really monitored, and they're going to not end up being at as high of a risk of becoming a real wanted target. But it's going to totally depend, and I think what we've seen from at least Elite Dangerous was that there's a good contingent of players that want the really high bounty on them because it encourages PvP against them, and it also looks to them as being, hey, look, I'm a huge pest, or I'm a huge troll. There's going to be people, and I want to make sure that I'm clear, because not everybody that does piracy is a troll, because that's not the case. Pirates are a really important part of the game because it ends up providing kind of that ebb and flow, that yin and yang. You need the bad so you can be good. So there's going to be people that kind of relish having that large bounty. So I don't think it's going to be a huge, a real large deterrent, but I think for some people it's going to be, it'll probably dictate where they want to conduct their operations. Kaiman Gaming says, he had a really long question, so I'm doing his TLDR. Can you build and sell anything available in the game? As far as manufacturing goes, we don't know how much we're actually going to be able to do. We get an idea of some smaller scale things, like there's a workbench that you can get for your hangar, or there's the science modules on like the Endeavor. So you should be able to do some construction, but I don't think you're going to be seeing large scale operations like an assembly line, at least for a while. But I think whatever you can acquire, you should be able to sell. I think we're going to have a very free type of market that's going to allow you to really conduct your business how you see fit. If there's a demand, you should be able to meet that demand. So yes, I think to some extent you're going to be able to sell anything available in the game. But as far as building goes, if you're talking about like a Badger laser repeater, well, that's only going to be made by, Klaus and Warner. You're not going to be able to necessarily be able to, you're not going to necessarily be able to build that yourself. Though you could find one, repair it, and then sell it, like that sort of thing. But as far as actually constructing it from scratch, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. And then you also say that you're looking for 4 solo ships to see what you like: combat, exploration, cargo, and all-arounder. So when we look at this, you say solo ships, so I'm going to go ahead and just keep it to smaller scale things. For combat, there's a lot of different types of combat, so you kind of need to really narrow it down to what you like. If you like a fast and nimble ship with some decent firepower, I say something like a Sabre is a really good option, or the new Buccaneer should probably be an interesting one. If you want something on the cheaper end of the spectrum, something like an Avenger does pretty well. Something like a Gladius is getting some improvements, but the Gladius isn't in a very good place right now. If you want something that's slower and tankier, then the Super Hornet's really hard to argue against because you can put a lot of weapons on it and it's very, very, very durable. As far as exploration is concerned, Freelancer Dur always gets my non-multi-crew recommendation. Now, you can fit 2 to 3 people on a Freelancer, but that doesn't mean you need 2 to 3 people. So you don't need to limit yourself to something like a 315p, although the 315p should be good. I just think the Freelancer Dur offers you a lot more. As far as cargo goes, smaller ships, I would have said the Reliant Core would be a really good option, but once I've actually seen it in hangar, there's not a lot of space there for cargo. So if you want to just do limited scale cargo transportation, the Reliant may be a good choice. But if you want to spend a little bit more money, then the Freelancer is a really good option. I think it kind of meets that sweet spot of the amount of cargo you take and the capability as a solo craft. And then as far as all-rounder ship type goes, Avenger does, bounty hunting, cargo, EMP. You could probably suit it out for just pure combat. There's a lot the Avenger can do. The Cutlass does a really good job all around as well, and a little bit more expensive. That's right on the border of solo-capable ship would be the Constellation Andromeda. So for these, I would probably say Sabre, Freelancer, Dur, Freelancer, and Cutlass. Although the Cutlass and the Freelancer kind of compete in their roles a little bit. So you may be better just going with 3 ships or picking another role and then kind of replacing one of those 2. And then for today's last question, KK Philippe says, continuation of the assassination question, what do you think would happen if I was planetside and my target was completely alone and I shoot them from behind? So no one would see who the killer was, not even the victim. Would I still get a bounty? Again, it goes down to monitored space or not. So let's say you're sitting in a bar, the bartender goes to the back of the room, and it's just you and your target, and you kill him. Well, if there's like computers and stuff that are around that are monitoring people's activity, yes, you would still get a bounty. But if you're out exploring, or maybe you're tracking a target who's on a planet trying to do like mining, so they have a prospector on the planet's surface and they're walking around using some little like handheld scanner, if that's not monitored space and there's nobody around to see it and you kill them, no, you would not get a bounty. So I think the one thing that follows up on that, though, is what the reputation system ends up looking like. Is it robust enough where players can, retroactively go back and say, this person killed me, I don't really like them. That may not actually add you a bounty, but it may end up decreasing your player reputation. I don't know what that reputation system is going to look like yet, but that's probably a factor you need to at least consider. So that's going to be it for this episode of The Inbox. As always, if you have questions, get them in. I'm going to try and continue to crank through these. Otherwise, stay tuned for a whole lot more content. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.